I am pleased to welcome our next panel moderator, Megan Schmidt from the University of Iowa Holden Comprehensive Cancer Center, along with the panelists who will talk about cancer clinical trials in Iowa. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Jackie. Good afternoon. As Jackie said, my name is Megan Schmidt. I am a member of the Community Outreach and Engagement team at Holden Comprehensive Cancer Center. As a National Cancer Institute designated cancer center, Holden is responsible for understanding and addressing the burden of cancer throughout Iowa. This includes ensuring that Iowans have access to and awareness of cancer clinical trials. So in the spring of 2023, Holden convened a group of oncologists and administrators, navigators, nurses, and coordinators from several different organizations across the state to discuss how they could collaboratively assess and address barriers to cancer clinical trial enrollment and opening more clinical trials across Iowa. So today, several representatives of the group are here to speak more about the importance of clinical trials, barriers that both patients and providers face with clinical trial enrollment, and to share some ways that they're working together. I am pleased to introduce our three panelists, Shannon Benson, Director of Clinical Trials at Mission Cancer and Blood, Mimi McKay, Assistant Director of Clinical Research Coordination at University of Iowa Healthcare Holden Comprehensive Cancer Center, and Lori Pedig, Director of Cancer Services at St. Anthony Regional Cancer Center. Shannon, could you start and tell us a little bit about the different types of cancer clinical trials that exist?
Yeah, I think the obvious answer is treatment or intervention. So we're always looking at most effective treatment options for patients, but there's a lot more that people don't know about. So there are large-scale prevention studies that are done. There are trials that look at ways to diagnose cancers or better ways to diagnose. Trials that look at ways of screening cancers. There are also, this is kind of one of my favorite types of clinical trials that are done, are the, they have different names, so quality of life or symptom management trials. And those aren't always as attractive as, say, an interventional trial, but if you have a side effect and we can't give you your full chemo because of a side effect, well, that side effect is then, not letting you have the most effective treatment. If we're having to halt your chemo, dose reduce your chemo. So these set of trials are looking at controlling those symptoms so that people can get the full dose. Dr. Deming and I actually probably 15 years ago enrolled, I think, 150 patients on a breast dermatitis trial for women getting radiation. And, we were trying to make sure they could get through all 6 weeks of their radiation without having to stop that because of dermatitis. So there's also different phases of trials. So there are early phase 1 trials, phase 2 trials done more in the academic setting. And then your later phase trials are done more in the community setting. But those are also, so there's different types and then there's different phases of trials.
Thank you, Shannon. Mimi, building off of what Shannon explained about trials, can you explain why trials are important?
Yeah, absolutely. How about now? No. How about now? All right. Clinical trials are important in advancing cancer care. And, as Shannon said, whether it's a screening trial, a prevention trial, a treatment trial, we're looking to do better tomorrow than we're doing today. And in order to evaluate the interventions that are being studied in all of these trials, we need patients to enroll on the trials. And one of the biggest reasons that trials close early is failure to accrue. And we know that far more patients say they're willing to participate in a trial than actually do participate. And, that can be because they don't know some of the basics, like Shannon just told us, or that they're not aware of what's available to them. And we're trying to help patients in the state of Iowa be aware of what's available so that they can make an informed decision and advocate for themselves.
Thank you, Mimi. Shannon, can you talk a bit about barriers that both patients and providers face in cancer clinical trials?
Yeah, so this really just piggybacks off what Mimi said. So I think number one is lack of awareness. Patients don't know that they exist. I love to tell a story. So I was speaking to a board of directors one time, super prominent man in the community. He had lost his wife to colon cancer, and he said to me, we were desperate for options. He said, I had no idea that clinical trials were being done right here in Des Moines. And I said to him, where did your wife get her treatment? And I said, you can rest assured that she was screened for a clinical trial. So there wasn't one available to her, but she was screened because we screen 100% of the people who walk through the doors as a new consult. And that was so comforting to him because he just didn't even know that this existed. So yeah, lack of awareness, number one. Number two is lack of access. So yes, we have trials here in Des Moines. Yes, we have trials in Iowa City. Where else in Iowa do we have trials? A handful of places. But, as we've discussed today, Iowa is rural. I'm from Mount Air, Iowa. It's harder. I've said before, I want people to be able to, if you can buy a pair of jeans within 30 miles, you should be able to go on a clinical trial within 30 miles. In Mount Air, I think we had a farm and home. That was where you could buy a pair of jeans. You had to go to Creston if you wanted something other than that brand. But it should be as easy as buying a pair of jeans going on a clinical trial. I think there's also, unfortunately, there's still fear, distrust, and suspicion of research. So people are afraid of being treated like a guinea pig. People are concerned about not being able to pick their treatment and kind of control what treatment arm they're going to be assigned to. There's also the fear of getting no treatment or a placebo. So I used to talk with patients all the time on our phase 3 trials. Yes, typically one of those arms is going to get a placebo, but it's standard of care. This group, if it's the interventional group, is going to have your standard of care proven, what we know works for you, plus maybe a new drug. Standard of care alone. So maybe plus a placebo. And the only thing that placebo does is allow us to have a double-blind trial, which then just creates better science. So, having those conversations, yes, you're seeing the word placebo, but you have cancer and we're going to treat you with what we know works. So that's kind of, the backbone of phase 3 trials. But I think addressing those fears, there's some, there are fears with big pharma. I think that's also something that clinicians need to talk about with their patients. I think those are kind of the big ones that I hear about and hear feedback on.
Thank you, Shannon. Lori, coming from a rural cancer center, can you speak to some of the unique challenges to opening trials at rural healthcare centers?
The first challenge is going to be, can you guys hear? Okay. That one.
I don't think
Maybe
so.
none of them are going to work. The biggest challenge is the physician involvement. You've got to have a provider who's on board with clinical trials, and then that provider is also going to need that team of support. It's been mentioned multiple times through this whole entire day, the administrative burden that goes with clinical trials, and that's even heightened in a rural setting. There's not a big group of individuals in an office who's screening the patients, going through the paperwork, what trials are open, drug availability, coordination. At St. Anthony, we were lucky that we had a passionate physician who introduced me to Shannon, but then it definitely is the facility administration to be on board with that because it takes time and resources outside of our normal clinical care. And then also the fear of if I send a patient for a clinical trial not at my center, will that patient come back? Physicians needing to be open to having those conversations of would you fit into a trial somewhere else? And then how can we collaborate care versus losing our patient to another center?
Thank you, Lori. Knowing these barriers exist, can you tell us how the board is working to reduce the barriers and increase access to trials?
So first and foremost was just setting up the group and having those discussions. We're looking at multiple levels of clinical trials across the state from the university level to the community level. The communities are serving thousands of patients every year. And how can we continue that at home or that base of care there, but also have opportunities with the university level? So just starting those conversations. And then secondly was creating the website that is an easy reference for what what clinical trials are available, what physicians are part of clinical trials. And then now we're looking at kind of a roadshow of where can we go and meet centers, whether it's virtually or in person, with some members of our board to just have discussions around clinical trials and their barriers.
Thank you, Lori. Mimi, do you have any other next steps to add? I know Lori touched on them a bit.
Yeah, as she said, the roadshow. So we're excited to talk about, you can tell we're all excited about clinical trials. If any of you are interested in talking with us, whether over Zoom or an in-person discussion, we're all excited to come meet with you. So you can find any one of us if that's something that's of interest to you.
Thank you. We want to open it up in case any of you have questions as well.
Thank you. Dick Deming, Mercy Cancer Center, Des Moines. I appreciate all of the barriers you specified, and I would agree with those. Lori, you touched on one that I think isn't recognized as much, and that is the barrier of not having physician champions. So, for example, we have the NCORP. We've got about, 30 medical oncologists that all want to say they're part of the NCORP, but only about 5 actually put patients on the clinical trial. And what people don't understand is that it takes considerable amount of time from the physicians and the nurses to, number one, make sure the patient's eligible, to go through everything, to do the consent, and to do all of the paperwork. It is really a labor of love and dedication to excellence and to promotion of the overall profession. And I think that the barrier of physicians that are very busy getting engaged and taking the extra time to do it is a bigger barrier than actually the patient's barrier. So whatever we can do at the national level to kind of streamline the administrative burden would really, really big. And I just want to also give out another shout to the National Cancer Institute, to the National Cancer Institute's Community Oncology Research Program. It allows centers at community cancer centers to enroll on NCI studies. We have 60 open at our center, and if you are part of Iowa and you're not affiliated with the university, you can become part of the NCORP and have available to you hundreds of clinical trials that can be opened at community cancer centers. So it's a huge beneficial program that the NCI sponsors that allows very significant clinical research to be done at community hospitals. So those are the 2 points. Maybe you could elaborate more for what do you do besides buying donuts and getting coffee for your doctors to encourage your doctors not just to be listed as being able to enroll patients, but to actually enroll patients. One thing I found is find just one study that's not too difficult and get them engaged in that one study of a common cancer. What other ideas do you have to get the docs really on board with enrolling patients?
I will speak at any support group because if they hear it from their patient, if the patient says, I want to go on this trial, is there a trial available for me? They're probably going to give a wholehearted attempt to enroll that patient versus if me or someone from my team comes up and says, hey, this might be a good option for your patient. Okay, yep, I'll look at it in a little bit, I mean, I've tried to encourage our staff, I loved the award earlier that, for the colorectal cancer. As a family physician, you can say, hey, it looks like you're due for your colonoscopy. Not interested? Okay, check the box. I talked with them about their colonoscopy. Or you can have a good 10-minute solid conversation with someone about why they need to have a colonoscopy, how curable colon cancer is when it's found early. I mean, those are very different things, but the doctor can check the box. It's been done by offering it and moving on. So I think the same thing applies with clinical trials. A physician can truly give a wholehearted discussion with a patient and say, okay, here's why this would be a good option for you. Here's why maybe it wouldn't. Having that conversation, letting them, read through a consent, really making an informed decision. But I really feel like the best thing is if they hear it from their patient and the patient is interested.
One note to that for is having an aging population in Iowa is the family members calling and asking, are clinical trials open at your facility? If not, I may take my loved one for a second opinion. So that was a conversation that we had heard through our center is, do you have clinical trials? If not, we're going to seek care somewhere else. And see if there's a trial open or what trials are available. So when we were able to open up that trial and that screening process through our center, that made that conversation very easy. Yes, our patients are screened for clinical trials. Yes, we see what trials are available and open, and we'll try to find that partnership.
Hi, I'm Hala. I'm a research coordinator in Des Moines. I always think it's interesting to talk to physicians and patients, like the difference between pharmaceutical trials and federal, because a lot of the times pharmaceutical trials are more attractive because of funding or new experiences, new things, but kind of federal trials are the ones that change standard of care. Can you guys talk a little bit about that and your experiences with that?
I think they both serve a purpose. I have 10 years of experience with NCORD trials and federal trials, and I have about 4 years of experience with industry trials. I don't know. I just think I think what it comes down to is what if it's an interventional trial, what is the drug? And if the doctor is excited about the drug, they don't care. They don't care who the sponsor of the trial is. They don't even know if it's industry or if it's NCI. They want the drug for their patient. I do see, NCI doing things outside of interventional trials. And again, I feel like that's where I've seen the bulk of the work with symptom management. Not that there aren't symptom management trials with industry, but that's just not been a focus for us. So I don't know. I feel like they both serve a purpose. I don't have a good answer.
Hi. Just had a question about patient navigation. I love patient navigators. Have a passion for that. And so I was curious if you could speak into a little bit about how you see patient navigation playing into clinical trial enrollment and discussions, because you just mentioned how burdensome that time for that conversation can be when a patient's with their doctor. Can you talk a little bit more about how patient navigation has or should be influencing clinical trial enrollment?
I think there's multiple ways that patient navigation can, help provide education to patients. Maybe at the beginning of their diagnosis, just letting them know that clinical trials exist, so that if the time comes that they need to make a treatment decision, they have a lot of decisions to make. They're getting a lot of information. If they already know the basics of clinical trials, maybe it'll make that decision, whether it's a standard of care option that the doctor talks to them about or a clinical trial option. They would have already had that education, so they know what questions to ask about the clinical trial, and it helps them further down their diagnosis.
My question is, so when you have the diagnosis and then you decide what doctor you're going to, then that doctor will tell you what they can do for you. But if you don't know anything about, there could be some other kind of treatment, how are you supposed to know that? Or should they have like a questionnaire? Like there's usually a questionnaire and you go through blah, 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 blah. And, then they're going to tell you what they can do. So then do you just ask, is there something else that can be done? If I don't want to do chemo, I don't want to do radiation. Is that what you're saying? How do I know there is a clinical trial? I wouldn't even know the verbiage.
Right, and I think that's why sometimes like education in this sort of venue about basics of clinical trials, I think patients all have, we all have a board of advisors in our lives that help us make decisions when we're needing to make a difficult decision. And I think the more that we talk about clinical trials, patients, their friends, their family members can bring these things to their mind when they're having to make these difficult decisions or they're in the midst of a difficult diagnosis. Because you're right, not everybody knows the questions to ask, but simply asking, is there a clinical trial available? Or as Lori said, do you offer clinical trials here? And, asking, if one's available to me, will you present me with the option? Because if patients aren't given the option, then the choice is made for them that they can't participate. And, I think any way that we can get the word out about clinical trials so that patients are empowered to ask about them, I think is a step in the right direction.
Is there also information of whether or not it works or not?
So that's what a clinical trial is about, studying whether the intervention is better than what we're doing now. So sometimes there'll be results, midway through the trial about how things are going, but the overall results aren't evaluated until the end of the trial. But if it's a treatment trial, you'll get the same evaluations throughout your treatment to see if that treatment is working for you or if it is not working for you.
And then you would go back to your doctor?
Yep, you would be with your doctor.
Offered in the beginning?
Yep. And the doctor would walk you through all of that.
Okay. Thank you so much to our panelists. I am pleased to announce that we are now going to take a snack break that will run until 2:55. So the snack table will actually be in the exhibit hall, and it's also your last opportunity to visit the exhibitors and turn in your bingo card to the registration desk. One thing before you head out, though, if you're part of ICANN, please come up to the front for a picture, and we'll see everybody back here at 2:55 for the closing session.